She raised the camera. 10:47 p.m., the flash went off, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, standing in the shadows near the front door, was someone who shouldn't have been there. By midnight, Jennifer Caldwell was gone. No scream, no struggle, no goodbye. Her mother waited by the phone. The police searched the woods. Volunteers checked every road, every ditch, every hidden corner of their small Virginia town. 4 months passed. Nothing. Then, a landscaper opened the garden shed behind the house where Jennifer disappeared. Inside, buried beneath a tarp, was her backpack. Wallet intact. Keys inside. A half-finished letter, still folded in the front pocket. But Jennifer? Still missing. The discovery didn't answer the question. It made everything worse. Because if her belongings were hidden mere feet from where she vanished, who put them there? And what else had they been hiding? What happened next changed everything. That photograph? It held the answer. But what investigators found when they developed the film was so disturbing, it took 2 years to solve. If you want to know who was in that house with Jennifer and what they did after the flash went off, smash that like button and subscribe right now. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some mysteries are more terrifying once they're solved. Let's find out what really happened. Jennifer Caldwell was not the kind of teenager who vanished. She was reliable, the type of girl neighbors trusted, the type parents pointed to as an example. Every Sunday, she sang in the church choir. Every Thursday, she babysat for the Murphys, a young couple with 2 boys under the age of 6. She was saving money for college. She had a best friend named Marcy, a part-time job at the library, and a future that seemed, by all accounts, inevitable. Jennifer was African American, one of only a handful of black families in Riverside, Virginia, a small town where population barely crested 4,000. Her family had lived there for 3 generations. Her grandfather had worked at the paper mill. Her father owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. The Caldwells were known, respected, integrated into the fabric of the community in ways that felt both significant and fragile. The town of Riverside was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors. 1 main street, 2 churches, a diner that closed at 8. It was the sort of town where everyone knew everyone, and where something like a disappearance felt impossible. But on the evening of October 14th, 1989, Jennifer left her house at 7:15 p.m. She wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and her favorite pair of white sneakers. Her mother, Carol, watched her walk down the driveway, backpack slung over one shoulder. Jennifer waved. Carol waved back. It was the last time Carol Caldwell ever saw her daughter. The Murphy home sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides. The house itself was modest, 2 stories, pale yellow siding, a detached shed in the backyard that hadn't been opened in months. David and Rebecca Murphy had hired Jennifer regularly since the summer. She was punctual, good with the kids. They trusted her completely. That night, the Murphys left for a dinner party at 7:30 p.m. Jennifer arrived right on time. She played with the boys until bedtime, read them stories, tucked them in by 8:45. According to the timeline investigators would later reconstruct, Jennifer called her mother at 9:20 p.m. to check in, a habit Carol had insisted on. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. Jennifer said everything was fine. The boys were asleep. She'd be home by midnight. Carol said she loved her. Jennifer said it back. At 12:15 a.m., when the Murphys returned home, the front door was unlocked. The living room light was on. The television played softly in the background, but Jennifer was gone. Her jacket hung on the coat rack. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the kitchen counter. The house was undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. It was as if Jennifer had simply stood up mid-evening and walked out into the night. But her backpack, the one she carried everywhere, was missing. David Murphy called the Caldwell home immediately. Carol answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. No, Jennifer hadn't come home. No, she hadn't called. Within 20 minutes, Carol and her husband, Marcus, were at the Murphy house. Within an hour, the police arrived. By dawn, the search had begun. The first 48 hours after Jennifer's disappearance were a blur of floodlights, search dogs, and mounting dread. Riverside had never seen anything like it. Volunteers poured in from neighboring counties. The local fire department organized grid searches through the woods. Divers checked the creek that ran behind the Murphy property. Police interviewed neighbors, friends, classmates, anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. But no one had. The Murphy children, too young to fully understand what was happening, told investigators they'd heard nothing unusual. No voices, no footsteps. They'd slept through the entire night. Rebecca Murphy, visibly shaken, insisted Jennifer had been alone when they left. There were no visitors expected, no repair people, no strangers in the area. David Murphy submitted to a polygraph. He passed. The Caldwell family became the center of a media storm they hadn't asked for. Local news crews camped outside their modest two-story home. Reporters asked questions that felt both intrusive and inevitable. Had Jennifer been troubled? Was she seeing anyone? Could she have run away? Carol Caldwell's answer was always the same. My daughter did not run away. Someone took her. But as the days stretched into weeks, the leads dried up. Jennifer's face appeared on flyers stapled to every telephone pole in town. Her photograph, smiling, confident, wearing her choir robe, stared out from the evening news. The case became a fixture in the community, a wound that wouldn't close. And then, in early November, the investigation took a strange turn. A clerk at the Greyhound bus station, 2 towns over, called the police. She thought she'd seen Jennifer, or someone matching her description, buying a ticket to Richmond on the morning of October 15th. The girl had been alone, nervous, wearing a gray sweatshirt. The tip seemed promising, but when investigators pulled security footage, the girl on the tape looked nothing like Jennifer. Different height, different build. The lead evaporated. Still, it planted a seed of doubt. If Jennifer hadn't been abducted, if she'd left willingly, then why? And where would she go? Marcus Caldwell refused to entertain the theory. He spent his evenings driving the back roads around Riverside, searching ditches and abandoned buildings with a flashlight and a growing sense of desperation. Carol organized candlelight vigils. The community rallied. But beneath the public support, whispers began to circulate. Some wondered if the Caldwells were hiding something. Others questioned whether Jennifer had been involved with someone she shouldn't have been. A few, mostly older residents who remembered a different Riverside, suggested the girl had simply gotten in over her head. The rumors were never loud, but they were there. By December, the case had gone cold. The searches stopped. The news crews moved on. The flyers faded in the rain. Jennifer Caldwell became another name on a missing persons list, a file gathering dust in a small-town police station. Her family never stopped looking, but the rest of Riverside, slowly, quietly, began to forget. Until February 12th, 1990. That was the day a landscaper named Tom Briggs arrived at the Murphy home to prepare the yard for spring planting. The Murphys had hired him weeks earlier. They wanted the property cleaned up. They were thinking of selling. Too many memories. Too much weight. Tom started with the garden shed, a small, weathered structure tucked against the tree line. The door was rusted shut. He pried it open with a crowbar, expecting tools and old paint cans. Instead, he found a faded blue backpack shoved beneath a tarp. And everything changed. Tom Briggs didn't touch the backpack. He stepped back, heart pounding, and called the Murphys. Rebecca answered. When Tom described what he'd found, her voice went quiet. She told him to leave everything exactly as it was. Then she hung up and called the police. Within an hour, the Murphy property was once again swarming with investigators. Detective Raymond Holloway had been the lead on Jennifer's case since the beginning. He was a 30-year veteran of the county sheriff's department, methodical, patient, and haunted by the cases he couldn't solve. Jennifer's disappearance had weighed on him. He'd reviewed the file dozens of times, searching for something he'd missed. Now, standing in the dim interior of the garden shed, he stared at the backpack and felt a chill he couldn't explain. It was Jennifer's. No question. Carol Caldwell confirmed it within minutes of arriving. The backpack was distinctive, pale blue canvas with a small embroidered patch of a sunflower on the front flap. Jennifer had sewn it on herself. Holloway photographed the scene before carefully opening the bag. Inside, neatly arranged, were Jennifer's belongings, her wallet with her school ID and $17 in cash, a set of house keys, a paperback novel, Beloved by Toni Morrison, with a bookmark halfway through, a pack of chewing gum, a half-finished letter written on lined notebook paper addressed to her best friend Marcy, and a Polaroid camera. The camera still had film inside. 3 pictures remaining. Holloway bagged everything as evidence, his mind racing. The backpack had been hidden deliberately, tucked under a tarp, covered with old gardening tools, shoved into the darkest corner of the shed. Whoever put it there hadn't wanted it found, but they also hadn't taken anything. The money was still there, the ID untouched. That didn't fit the profile of a robbery. It didn't fit any profile Holloway knew. The letter was the first thing the investigators analyzed. Written in Jennifer's neat handwriting, it described her week, choir practice, a test she'd aced, her frustration with a boy at school who wouldn't leave her alone. The tone was light, normal. There was no indication she was planning to run away, no hint of fear or distress. The letter ended mid-sentence. Marcy Wallace, Jennifer's best friend, was brought in for questioning again. She'd been interviewed multiple times in the months since the disappearance, but now detectives wanted to know if the letter meant anything. Had Jennifer mentioned the boy she was frustrated with? Did Marcy know his name? Marcy, now 18 and visibly exhausted by the ordeal, confirmed what Jennifer had written. The boy was a classmate named Kyle Brennan, a senior, popular, persistent. Jennifer had complained about him. He'd asked her out multiple times. She'd said no every time, but Marcy didn't think it was serious. Just annoying. Kyle Brennan was brought in for questioning the next day. He was 20 years old now, working at his father's construction company. He admitted he'd had a crush on Jennifer in high school. Yes, he'd asked her out. Yes, she'd turned him down. But he insisted he'd moved on. He'd been at a party the night Jennifer disappeared. Dozens of witnesses could confirm it. His alibi checked out. The investigation stalled again. But the Polaroid camera nagged at Holloway. Why would Jennifer bring a camera to a babysitting job? And why hadn't she taken any pictures? He sent the camera to the state crime lab with specific instructions. Develop the film and check for prints. The results came back 3 weeks later. There were fingerprints on the camera, Jennifer's and one other set, unidentified. The film had been partially exposed, but only one image had been captured. It was a photograph of the Murphy living room, taken from the hallway. The timestamp on the back of the photo read 10:47 p.m., October 14th, 1989. More than an hour after Jennifer's last phone call home. The image showed the couch, the coffee table, the glow of the television. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible in the shadows near the front door, was a figure, blurred, indistinct. Human-shaped. Someone had been in the house with Jennifer. The photograph changed everything. For months, investigators had assumed Jennifer disappeared sometime between 9:30 p.m., when she finished her phone call, and midnight, when the Murphys returned. But the Polaroid proved she'd been alive and in the house at 10:47 p.m., and she hadn't been alone. Detective Holloway assembled a team to re-interview everyone connected to the case, the Murphys, the neighbors, Kyle Brennan, even Jennifer's family. The photograph suggested an intruder, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, which meant one of two things. Either Jennifer had let someone in, or they'd already been inside. The Murphys were questioned again, this time more aggressively. Had they given anyone a key? Did they have a handyman, a friend, A relative who might have had access to the house? Rebecca broke down in tears. David, pale and shaking, insisted they'd change the locks after Jennifer disappeared. No one else had a key. But when pressed, David admitted something he hadn't mentioned before. A few weeks prior to Jennifer's disappearance, he'd noticed the shed door was ajar one morning. He'd assumed the wind had blown it open. He'd closed it and thought nothing more of it. Holloway felt his stomach tighten. The shed, the same shed where Jennifer's backpack had been hidden, had been accessed before she vanished. Forensic teams returned to the Murphy property and tore the shed apart. They found old fingerprints on the door handle, too degraded to identify. They found footprints in the dirt outside, size 10 men's boots, common brand, impossible to trace, and they found something else. Scratches on the inside of the shed door. Fresh, deliberate, as if someone had carved them recently. The marks formed letters. Sorry. The discovery made headlines. Who had written it? Was it an apology from Jennifer? Some indication she'd left willingly? Or was it a message from whoever had taken her? Holloway didn't believe Jennifer had written it. The angle was wrong. The letters were carved at shoulder height, higher than Jennifer's reach, and the word itself felt wrong. If Jennifer had run away, why apologize? And if she'd been abducted, why would her captor express remorse? Unless the apology wasn't for Jennifer. The investigation turned to the neighborhood. Detectives canvassed the area again, this time asking about unusual activity in the weeks leading up to Jennifer's disappearance. Had anyone seen strangers? Unfamiliar vehicles? Anything out of place? An elderly woman named Mrs. Pritchard, who lived 2 houses down from the Murphys, mentioned something she'd forgotten to report earlier. In early October, she'd seen a man walking near the Murphy property late one evening. She couldn't describe him well. It had been dark. But she remembered thinking it was odd. The man had been standing near the tree line, just watching the house. She'd assumed he was a neighbor, but now she wasn't sure. Holloway asked her to work with a sketch artist. The resulting composite was vague. A white male, medium build, possibly in his 30s, wearing a dark jacket. It could have been anyone, but it was something. The sketch was circulated. Tips flooded in. Most led nowhere, but one stood out. A woman named Diane Fletcher, who lived on the other side of town, called the tip line. She said the man in the sketch looked familiar. She thought she'd seen him at the diner a few times. He'd always sat alone, didn't talk much, paid in cash. The diner's owner, an older man named Frank Gallo, confirmed the sighting. Yes, there had been a man matching that description. He'd come in regularly throughout September and October. Always ordered coffee. Never stayed long. Frank hadn't seen him since mid-October. The timeline aligned. The man had stopped coming to the diner right around the time Jennifer disappeared, but no one knew his name. No one had his license plate. He'd vanished as completely as Jennifer had. Holloway circulated the sketch more widely. He contacted surrounding counties, other police departments, even the FBI, but the man remained a ghost. Then, in April 1990, a hiker found something in the woods 3 miles from the Murphy property, a white sneaker, women's size 7, Jennifer's size. The sneaker was weathered, but intact. It had been partially buried under leaves, as if someone had tried to hide it, or as if it had been there for months, slowly sinking into the earth. Forensic analysis confirmed it was Jennifer's. The brand matched. The wear patterns matched. Carol Caldwell identified it through tears, but the location raised more questions than it answered. 3 miles was a significant distance from the Murphy home. If Jennifer had walked that far, why? And if she'd been taken, why would her abductor discard a single shoe in the middle of the woods? Search teams combed the area for days. They found nothing else. No clothing. No remains. No signs of a struggle. Just one shoe, alone in the wilderness. Holloway began to construct a theory. Maybe Jennifer had been held somewhere nearby. Maybe she'd tried to escape. Maybe the shoe had come off as she ran, Or maybe it had been placed there deliberately, a false trail meant to lead investigators away from the truth. The case was now over 6 months old. The media had mostly moved on, but the Caldwell family refused to stop searching. Marcus spent every weekend walking the woods, calling his daughter's name into the silence. Carol appeared on local television, begging for anyone with information to come forward. And then, in June 1990, the anonymous letter arrived. It came to the sheriff's department in a plain envelope with no return address, postmarked from Richmond. The letter was typed on a manual typewriter. The words, slightly uneven, the ribbon faded. It read, "She didn't suffer. She trusted the wrong person. The backpack was mine to keep, but I couldn't. I'm sorry." Look where it began. Holloway read it 3 times, his pulse quickening. The letter confirmed what he'd suspected. Jennifer had been killed. But the phrasing, "trusted the wrong person," suggested she'd known her abductor. And the final line was a clue. Look where it began. The Murphy house, the shed, the starting point of everything. Holloway returned to the property with a forensic team and ground-penetrating radar. They scanned the backyard, the woods, the area around the shed, and beneath the shed's foundation, they found disturbed soil. They began to dig. 3 feet down, they found bones. The remains were not Jennifer's. Forensic anthropologists determined they belonged to a man, approximately 30 to 40 years old, who had been dead for at least 2 years, predating Jennifer's disappearance. The bones showed signs of trauma consistent with a fall or severe blow to the head. Dental records eventually identified him as Michael Garrett, a drifter reported missing in 1987. The discovery shattered every theory Holloway had built. The Murphy property, it seemed, had been a burial site long before Jennifer ever stepped foot inside. But the connection was undeniable. Whoever had hidden Michael Garrett's body had returned 2 years later. And this time, they'd taken Jennifer. The anonymous letter was analyzed for fingerprints. There were none. The typewriter was never identified. But investigators noticed something in the phrasing. The backpack was mine to keep, but I couldn't. It suggested guilt, hesitation, a mind unraveling. In late 1990, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former Riverside resident named Alan Driscoll, who had moved to North Carolina, contacted police after seeing a news story about Jennifer's case. He said he'd grown up next door to the Murphys. He'd moved away in 1988. But before he left, he'd known the previous owners of the Murphy house. The Murphys had purchased the property in early 1989. The previous owner, a man named Vincent Shaw, had lived there alone for years. He'd been a quiet, reclusive figure, no family, few friends. He'd sold the house abruptly in late 1988 and moved out of state. Holloway tracked Vincent Shaw to a small apartment in Tennessee. When police arrived, Shaw was gone. His landlord said he'd left weeks earlier without notice. No forwarding address. But in Shaw's apartment, investigators found a box of photographs. Some were of the Murphy house. Others were of the shed. And buried at the bottom of the box was a photograph of Jennifer, taken from a distance, candid, as if someone had been watching her. Vincent Shaw became the prime suspect, but he was never found. His truck was discovered abandoned near the Tennessee-Kentucky border. Inside were more photographs, a typewriter matching the one used for the anonymous letter, and a handwritten note that read simply, "I can't undo it." Authorities believe Vincent Shaw killed himself somewhere in the Appalachian wilderness. His body was never recovered. Jennifer Caldwell's remains were found in August 1991, buried in a remote section of National Forest nearly 80 miles from Riverside. The location matched descriptions in Shaw's notes. She'd been deceased since October 14, 1989. The medical examiner determined she'd died from asphyxiation. Vincent Shaw had known Jennifer. He'd watched her. And on the night of October 14th, he'd returned to the house he'd once owned, the house where he'd buried another victim. And he'd taken her life. The Caldwell family buried their daughter in September 1991. The service was attended by hundreds. Carol and Marcus stood together, grief-stricken, but finally granted the closure they'd fought for. Jennifer's case remains a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, and that sometimes the most dangerous person is the one we never see coming. The Murphy house was demolished in 1992. The land remains vacant. Locals say they still avoid it after dark. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, leave a comment with a case you'd like me to cover next. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And remember, some mysteries end not with answers, but with silence. And silence, as Jennifer Caldwell's story reminds us, can be the loudest sound of all.